Excellent. Okay, great. So we have a really interesting group of people joining us today, diverse group, very international group, people from India, from Colombia, many parts of Europe, and other parts of the world. So quite privileged that this sort of work has drawn such interest. So I invite you to share anything you'd like to share about yourselves in the Zoom chat. It's a good opportunity for networking, sharing, discussion. If there's a link to your work or an email contact you'd like to share, please feel free to do so in the chat. And hopefully we can, develop some networks because we are all plant-minded people. And so I'd like to begin the seminar. What we'll have is two segments. The first will be by Francis guiding us through some techniques of connecting, and then I will introduce you to some other techniques of connecting. But first, I'd like to give some introductory background to the idea of forest sentience. So we'll begin with the word sentience itself, which actually comes from Latin for sentience or sentience, and that's for feeling. So a sentient being is one with the capability of sensing or feeling, right? So sentience as feeling, sentience as sensing. Also, another definition of sentience is consciousness of or responsiveness to the sensations of seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, or smelling. So a sentient being is one who can uh, generate information from the many senses. And then another definition of senses by a philosopher is the depth of awareness possessed by an individual. So we can start to see patterns between these various definitions. And finally, Anthony Trewavas, who is a plant biologist who works in the area of plant intelligence, defines sentience simply as awareness of environment. So sentience as awareness, sentience as responsiveness, the ability to sense, and the ability to feel. So we normally think of sentience perhaps in terms of animals, but as we'll see, plants have a great range of sentient abilities. So how does this apply then to forest sentience? What might we mean? And you're welcome to think of this in your own terms as well. You may bring your own definitions to this idea, and please share them in the chat if you'd like. But forest sentience then can be thought of as the depth of awareness possessed by a forest, a kind of consciousness in the forest, or a forest capacity to sense, feel, and experience, a forest's ability to respond, communicate, and even remember, as we'll see later in the seminar. Trees and forests have this incredible ability to remember and to transmit memories. A forest self-awareness as a collective, right, as an ecology, but also as individual trees, much like a human community is composed of individuals with consciousness and self-awareness. And a community as a whole could be said to have that self-awareness as well. And finally, a forest's responsiveness to the sensations of seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, and smelling. And so at first we may think it sounds quite unusual for a tree to be able to smell or taste. But in fact, what we're learning in recent science is that trees and other plants, in fact, do have these sensory capacities. So I'd like to get us warmed up with something that Francis and I have been calling tree mind maps. And we usually think of mind maps as serving the human mind, as charting some of the connections and relationships in human thinking around a particular topic. So it can be a fairly straightforward activity or more complex, depending on the relationships that you want to map. But let's think of tree mind maps. And so this is the activity we'll just do for a few minutes to warm up. What you'll do is draw a tree in the middle of a piece of paper or on your screen. So this one I'm borrowing from a fantastic artist, Finnish artist, whose name is at the bottom. And so let's assume that I drew this masterfully. And we're going to then put 10 circles around the tree, 10 circles, blank circles around the tree. And then, as I'll show you in a moment, we're going to fill in some of the qualities that that the tree uses to describe tree self. I'll use that term tree self rather than itself. So let's say, for example, sheltering is up at the top, and that description might be placed at the top to refer to the canopy of the tree as sheltering. Right? Okay, so here is this brief warm-up exercise. So think of a tree you've encountered recently in your day-to-day life, and then draw the tree on a piece of paper or on the screen. Okay, so a real tree that you've encountered, draw the tree. Doesn't have to be terribly artistic, just whatever comes to mind. Then add 10 blank circles around the drawing. And then I'd like you to close your eyes, tune into your tree by listening, and then ask your tree to describe tree self to you. So let's begin. I'll give you a moment to think of a tree, then draw an image of the tree on your paper, and then add those 10 blank circles. So I'll give you a moment to do that, and then we'll proceed from there. Okay, so once you have that image on the page and you have those 10 circles, I'd like you to close your eyes and tune into your tree simply through listening. So a clearing of your mind and an opening to that tree. Okay, and then once you do that, ask your tree to describe tree self to you. So let's take a few minutes to do that. Okay, and once you have some adjectives or phrases coming to mind, open your eyes and fill in each circle with a word or phrase describing your tree. So see if you can get 10 descriptions of your tree given to you by the tree. Hey everyone, so you may be in the process of translating your tree's description. It's something you can certainly work on later. It's a nice activity to use if you're in an environmental education setting, or to open people up to the idea of tree communication. Right? And so that's just a warm up. And what I'd like to do now is transition over to my co-facilitator today, Francis Joy, who will uh, guide us through some practical ways of connecting to forest sentience through pareidolia and some forest visualizations. So Francis, please lead the way for us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thanks for a great introduction. And good afternoon, everybody from here in Rovaniemi in the Arctic Circle. My name is Dr. Francis Joy. I work at the Arctic Centre, University of Lapland. And for anybody who's visited our Forest Sentience website, you will know that I've written an extensive paper there about this phenomena of pareidolia and connections between static and temporary forms in different environments, different settings. And I wanted to bring into focus, just to try and open this, what's going to be a guided visualization meditation, up to bring in 6 images on a plate that you can see, which are here of different kinds of species of trees where pareidolia is evident. If we look at the top left hand tree there, we can see what looks like a person laid down with legs wide open and 2 arms going off to the left side, as though perhaps giving birth comes to mind. And then if we go to the bottom left, we can see the base of a spruce tree that has kind of quite reptile or reptilian-like features and forms that have grown out the root system. If we look at the middle, the top middle, we can see on the face of an oak tree, on the trunk of an oak tree, what looks quite similar to an owl's face, with 2 eyes and a beak that's just slightly off to the side there. And then below that, we've got the birch tree. There's a man's face in the white part of the bark. On the edge on the left side, you can see a nose, what looks like the position of an eye, and a mouth, and then one branch that is quite similar to an arm or a limb that's coming to the left. And if we go to the top on the right side, we can see this character here, an aspen tree that's got what looks like a quite wide mouth with one single eye, a little bit like a mythical kind of structure there. And then below we have a pine tree with a face that looks like it's got 2 eyes and a mouth that's slightly open here towards the base. So these are just a few images of what I've collected and photographed over the years I've been doing this work. And I wanted to open the discussion up today to provide some examples of what some of these forms can actually look like. So before I go and explain a little bit more about pareidolia and we go into the guided meditation visualization, I wanted to talk a little bit about this special time that we have approaching tomorrow, which is the time of the Spring Equinox here in the Northern Hemisphere. We call it Alban Isla in the Druid Celtic tradition, which is tomorrow morning. And in the Southern Hemisphere, for the people that are in Australia, you're in the time of the autumn equinox, which is the opposite to what we have here, called Alban Elved, which means the light on the water, which will be either tomorrow or on Thursday. And so one of the things, working with these powers of nature from a spiritual approach and also a sensory approach, is to understand that the developing, John talked about developing awareness. And so the awareness of these seasonal festivals invites us to become aware of any of the remnants of winter of in the Northern Hemisphere and summer in the Southern Hemisphere, which need to be integrated or let go as a way to attune ourselves, our own personal rhythms, to the rhythms of nature. And so the opportunity or purpose for this exercise is to help bring vision and insight for the coming seasons of spring and approaching summer here in the Northern Hemisphere, and the time of autumn and subsequent approaching winter in the Southern Hemisphere. And so becoming aware of the greater shifts and changes within the cosmos offers us the opportunity to develop a greater appreciation of the natural world and inherent powers, as a way of remembering that all around us magical and spiritual energies are to be found and encountered, for instance, at sunrise and sunset times, during moon cycles, the sun's cycles, solstices and equinoxes, the oceans, rivers, lakes and waterways. Within and around forests, trees, plants and their intelligence, and the animal, mammal and reptile kingdoms, we also find these powers in mountains, boulders and stones, namely the mineral kingdoms. And in addition, and also at this time of seasonal shifts and changes, let us also remember the mythological and archetypal powers that encompass our worlds. Myths relaying and portraying important narratives connected to customs and traditions, such as Kalevala here in Finland, and the stories and legends in Sami culture about the sun, moon, reindeer and giants. In the Southern Hemisphere in Australia, there are stories that play a central role and function in the everyday lives of the Aboriginal people, which are about dreaming and the creation of the universe and emergence of supernatural beings and animals, as well as concepts about trees holding up the sky. These are important because they inform us about humanity's communication and relationships with nature, both past and present. Archetypes, on the other hand, are representations within our unconscious of configurations that inform, direct and help organize our behaviors and thoughts, for instance, through dreaming. We find such manifestations in tarot or oracle cards, which also contain the different elements of earth, air, fire, water and spirit or ether. And in what ways these are manifest as connections to or communications with different kingdoms within nature, the wider cosmos, and the states of consciousness that can connect with the origins of the universe in a world that permeates everything. Speaking of communications with the kingdoms of nature brings us to our guided meditation and visualization for the seminar event and the subject matter of trees, tree communication and pareidolia. On the screen, as I've already mentioned, there are 6 photographs depicting representations as such. Pareidolia is a pattern of thinking, of commonality, of recognizing faces and forms within a diversity of kingdoms and beings, as well as appearance of faces, forms and patterns on mundane things such as animals, clouds, mountain tops, driftwood, in food, fruit, snow and ice. And in Finland and further afield in Norway, Sweden and Russia, we also find pareidolia on stone faces, linked with offering places, sacred places, with rock art, as demonstrated within our Forest Sentience website. There are many definitions and interpretations about what different images mean to different people and how they see and interpret them, which may be meaningful to them. But because of how diverse these images are, it brings together different ways of thinking and perceiving nature and its cycle in terms of sensory dialogue. And so the following meditation visualization is an example of in what ways, upon encountering pareidolia in a forest or woodland setting, we can harness it for creative purposes, stress relief and relaxation, as well as build confidence and imagination. Therefore, for this exercise, you're invited to sit or lie down in order to make yourself comfortable. Also, feel free to loosen any tight clothing that may make you feel restricted. You may also wish to put your phone on silent so you're not disturbed. Once you're settled, make sure you can hear my voice clearly and take 3 deep breaths. On each of the exhales, allow your body to relax, and please try not to fall asleep. This is to help you to relax and prepare for a shift in awareness from the physical reality into the inner realms of the imagination. So once you're comfortable and feel relaxed, close your physical eyes and open up the eyes in your imagination and see yourself standing at the gate at the entrance to a field. Looking directly ahead, you see an old forest area. Open up your senses by becoming aware of the time of day or night. Being on the edge of the equinox times means a shift in both energy and focus. And therefore, allow yourself to feel the atmosphere around you. Notice if you're barefoot or are you wearing shoes. What clothes are you wearing? What sounds can you hear? Bird song, animals calling, the sound of running water. Is there a wind or light breeze in the air which rustles the trees ahead? Before you open the gate and step into the field, become aware of any old emotions and processes, stress that might be weighing you down or keeping you isolated. And take a moment to leave them at the gate by offering whatever it is to the earth through the soles of your feet, or breathing it out and tendering it, offering it to the wind. Once you have settled down again, open the gate, and as you walk through it, take a moment to pause and attune yourself to the time of spring or autumn and notice how this feels. Now closing the gate and composing yourself, you have crossed over the threshold into the time of spring or autumn. Now turn to face the old forest which lies ahead. For the people in the Northern Hemisphere, ahead in the far distance, in the direction of the east, you can see a mountain range whose tops are still covered in snow. There are several eagles that are circulating these ranges, who are a symbol of the element of air and who are the gatekeepers of this realm. And therefore their cries bless you with the qualities of air and inspiration. In the direction of the west, for those in the southern hemisphere, you can see a large river in which the salmon are jumping freely. This is a symbol of autumn and the element of water. Feel the blessings of the salmon of wisdom, an ancient river, as it courses along the landscapes. Now bring your attention back to where you're standing at the gate and begin to walk across the field towards the old forest area. As you come close to the tree line at the edge of this wild place, an old pathway becomes apparent that leads deeply into the forest. Take a moment to pause and look around and see what kinds of trees are familiar to you. Notice their shapes and forms as well as their colours. Do any of them have faces or shapes or configurations that might resemble human or animals? Or even dragon-like heads, bodies or eyes that might resemble those of old wise men and women or mythical beings? How does their branches, trunks and crowns look? Notice if there's anything particular or familiar. How does this place where you're standing feel? Are you alone, or do you sense the presence of someone else somewhere who is not visible? Perhaps it is a forest guardian or a being from nature who inquisitively welcomes you into their realm. Asking you to leave your footwear at the edge of the forest and to furthermore open up your senses. Toes, feet, fingers, face, spine, head, hair, legs, nose, and to be aware of any particular tastes you may encounter in order to prepare for any possible dialogue or forms of communication. Becoming aware again of the pathway and begin to follow it into the deep old forest sanctuary that it is. As you walk again, take notice of how it feels to enter into this kingdom. Notice the power and presence of the trees and any boulders or stones that lie amongst them as you walk deeper into this land of the trees and the tree people. What sounds become evident? Birds singing, animal noises. Are they close by? Are they at a distance? Are their colours visible? You also recognise how some areas of the forest are densely populated and thus darker than other areas. As you continue on in the distance, just off the pathway, you can see a circular opening amongst the trees where light is present. Approaching it, you notice a change in atmosphere. And at the centre of the circle, there is a very large old birch tree with long and in some cases twisted branches that give it almost human-like characteristics of arms and legs. Some of these touch the ground while others look as if they're reaching towards the sky. Stop and pause for a moment and notice how this tree and the atmosphere it radiates feels on your senses. Look at the ground below the tree and notice how there is a thick green mossy carpet which has a particular aroma exuding from it that feels very rich and welcoming. As you begin to approach the tree at the place where its branches extend to, stop and pause for a moment and then introduce yourself. And take a look at the tree's shape and form and bark, and notice any patterns or markings that resemble a face, or even the shape or outline of a body. And also become aware of any aromas that become evident as a possible form of communication. What becomes apparent on the trunk of the tree is the symbol of a silver grey pentagram, which has 5 points to it, like a star, and is about the size of an apple. On closer examination, you note that the pentagram is actually located within the centre of a forehead and part of a face, which you can now make out on the trunk of a tree. The face, which is naturally formed, resembles that of an old female sovereign, a ruler and guardian of the birch species, an enchanted woman of the forest, and she is the protector of the sacred forest groves. You look deeply at her silver coat and imagine how it might look in moonlight. And your senses are also impacted by the scent of the tree, which is distinct and like a leathery perfume which comes from its thick bark. holding out your arms to your sides with your palms facing towards the tree, you begin taking slow steps forward, taking notice of how it feels to enter into its energy field. Is the feeling one of welcoming and openness, or does it feel restrictive? If the feeling of openness is evident, move slowly towards the trunk of the tree and carefully rest your forehead against the pentagram and close your eyes. Pause for a moment and adjust your own personal rhythm to that of the tree by feeling contact with it on your skin and taking several breaths as you calm your mind and you settle against it and feel its welcoming and protective spirit. In your own way, ask the tree a question or for help with tasks or goals you're setting. You may likewise wish to ask for help for a friend or relative who is in need of support in some way. Once this has been done, open yourself up to any form of dialogue or communication, especially through feelings or sensations or direct interaction. If the feeling of restrictedness is evident, look into the face of the tree and do not enter the energy field at this time. Instead, in your own way, either silently or verbally ask for healing for yourself, and then lie down on the ground where you are and relax. And you can stand or sit in silence for some moments until I ask you to return. Now it is time to return. But before you do, you notice that within the trunk of the birch tree, there is a small opening which contains clear, pure sap from inside the tree. Place your cupped hand into it and scoop some and drink it, becoming aware of how it interacts on the inside in terms of strength and wisdom. For anyone who is lying on the floor, open your eyes and see beside you a small birch bark vessel that contains liquid sap. Take it and drink it. Once this has finished, give thanks to the tree in your own way for anything that has been received, and slowly walk back towards the pathway, noticing how you feel. Once back on the pathway, retrace your footsteps back to the entrance to the forest and find and put your footwear back on. Once this has been done, turn and give thanks for the experience to the spirits of the forest. You notice, however, that there is a shift in your vision, and you realize that the trees seem to be swaying from side to side and back and forth at their trunks. Through silent understanding, you recognize that they are happy you came to visit their realm today, which brings a smile to your face. With a quiet acknowledgement, turn around and begin walking towards the gateway. And reaching the gate, open it, walk through it and close it again. And as you do, once on the other side, notice how you feel. Now it is time to come back to this reality, and so become aware of your body wherever you are sitting or lying, and feel the ground beneath you. Inhale 3 times and take your breath downwards towards your feet as a way to make sure you are fully back and present. You may wish to get up and walk around for a moment or drink some water. And that concludes the guided visualization meditation at this time.
Thank you so much, Francis, for such a wonderful guided meditation, a true gift from a sentient forest. And allow everyone a couple minutes to come back to the forum, and then we'll continue with our exploration of connecting with the sentient forest. Hey, everyone. And so we will continue in the same vein as Francis introduced us so beautifully to, with an exercise called Remembering with Plants. Remembering with Plants. And the aim of this exercise is to develop dialogue with plants through memory. Part of the visualization that Francis guided us through was developing communication and dialogue through various forms, through the senses, through feeling and sensation. But here we'll focus on memory. And I'd like to impart the idea of memory as always a dance between people and plants. So we may remember trees, we may remember plants, wild plants, garden plants, plants in greenhouses cultivated, plants at a distant remote location. In the same way, we're being remembered by plants. So our memories are always a dialogue or a dance. In recollecting, we are being recollected. And in making memories of plants, we are making memories with plants. And so this is to recognize that plants are incredibly vibrant with their own forms of memory. And through a memory activity, we can connect with that memory of plants. And it's interesting to see some of the popular representations of memory. They're quite plant-like, aren't they? With roots and what appear to be almost like leaves, tendrils, or rhizomes, right? So these are the branching patterns of memory that we assign visually to the faculty of memory, quite plant-like to begin with. And I want to preface this with something of a dilemma that we as human beings may strive to overcome, and that's the divide between the intellect and the imagination. Generally speaking, I believe Western people regard those two as separate, as polar opposites even. And this comes from the long tradition of Western philosophy that has theorized the intellect as distinct from the imagination. The intellect, of course, associated with rational thinking, the imagination associated with creativity, intuition, and even spirituality. And so in popular parlance, we're used to this sort of left brain, right brain divide. But the challenge, as I see it, is to bring the intellect and imagination into accord so that we can think of connecting with plants through our intellect imagination or imagination intellect, where they're both operating in a complementary way. And so this is the overall framework that I think these exercises work within, bringing our intellect and our imagination into dialogue, into accordance. Now, when we think of the latest research on plants and memory, it's quite remarkable. Research has shown that plants have the ability to remember changes in light, in temperature, in pressure, in stress, sound, and other variables, which makes sense if you think of plants responding to the spring. Even 2 days of spring here in the Northeast of the United States, 2 days of spring-like weather have brought all sorts of changes in the plant environment, flowering, blooming, leafing, etc. The common mustard displays multi-generational stress memory, right? So what that means is that the mustard will send or transmit memories to future generations so that those kin are better able to deal with stress, right? Much like if we have a parent who tells us about the stresses of work life or parenthood or education, getting higher education, right? That seems to prime us or prepare us for the stresses ahead, and plants do similar things. Interestingly, also, plants have the ability to forget harmful memories. It's been shown that plants can decide to repress memories. If the plant feels that that negative memory, that memory of a traumatic event, may have a harmful impact on future generations. And you may be familiar with the wooded web, or it's sometimes known as the rhizosphere. This has become quite popular in studies of forest intelligence. Well, in fact, one way of thinking of the rhizosphere, or the wooded web, which is the interconnectivity between trees, fungal networks, and the soil, and also mammals. One way of looking at that is as a memory network, because that's one of the prime functions of the rhizosphere, is to transmit memory. And there's also talk of sentinel or mother trees. These are old trees in forests who are memory keepers, responsible for passing their memories to future generations. And that's why old forests are so essential for the world today. Forests who retain the memories of ancient times, certainly times that precede the limited human capacity for memory. So remembering with plants, that's the background, right? That plants have this uncanny capacity for memory. And the aim here is to connect to the memory of plants, or at least to begin that process. So with that, I would like you to locate a plant, a living plant, or an object made from plant materials in your immediate area. So many of you will be in an office or a home environment. So that could be a potted plant, but it could also be a dried herb, even a wooden tabletop, a piece of paper. I think simply in doing this, we realize that plants are ubiquitous. They are around us at all times. And even in their processed form, they still carry a kind of vitality. They carry the memory. So just take a moment now and select either a living plant or a plant object in your immediate vicinity. Okay, so as you're selecting your plant, uh, make contact with your plant or your object. So if let's say you have a potted plant on your desk, that could be touching the soil or touching a leaf or simply putting your hand on a wooden surface. So long as you're in contact, physical contact with a plant or an object, making sure that your hand and arm are in a comfortable position for holding the plant or object for an extended time. So once you feel ready, you have your hand in a comfortable position, you have made contact with your plant or object, I'd like you to close your eyes and take a deep breath or a series of deep breaths and tune in to your plant or your plant object. I'd like you to notice how the plant or object feels. Is it hot, cool, cold? Is it smooth, hairy, coarse? Is it dry, moist, or wet? Just notice how the plant or object feels. Now I'd like you to notice how you feel in contact with the plant or object. You might feel peaceful, calm, tranquil. You might also feel uncertain. You may feel restless or even uneasy. Just take note of all the feelings that surface as you're in contact with the plant or the object. Now I'd like you to recall your earliest memory of this plant or object. How did you meet the plant? How did the plant enter your life? How did you meet the object? How did the object enter your life? When did you first encounter the plant or the object? What were the circumstances? Try to trace that earliest memory. Now that you've traced your earliest memory of your plant or your object, shift the focus of your memory back to your plant or object. What are your plant's earliest memories? Maybe your plant remembers being a seed or has memories of growing in a particularly good habitat. Maybe it remembers being raised in a greenhouse, or especially in the case of wood, on a plantation. Perhaps it has a traumatic memory of being processed into a material. How deep does your plant's memory go? What is your plant's earliest memory of you? How would your plant recall the circumstances of your first meeting? Notice how your plant communicates these memories. Is it through words or whispers, images, colors, sounds, odors, feelings, sensations? Perhaps your plant communicates in a language recognizable to you. Perhaps the language is unknown. Or perhaps your plant communicates these memories through feelings or sensations that register in your body. Now take a deep breath and come back to the forum. Open your eyes at the pace you feel ready to do. And I'd like you now to spend a few minutes just writing down or drawing or sketching or singing or any form of recording of the first words or phrases or images that come to mind. So while these are fresh in your mind, write them down or perform them or sing them or draw them, whatever method you prefer. In the next few days, I'd like you to take note of any signs or signals of dreams, visions, feelings, or sensations that arise connected to your plant. It could be that these signs surround you, and that may be the case of your plant, furthering this dialogue, this invitation to explore memory together. Okay, so that is an exercise in remembering with plants, and it's certainly something you could do on a more extended basis over an hour or even over several hours. That would be very powerful. It's an exercise that I often uh, go through in writing about plants and finding some sort of direction to begin writing, often poetry or other forms of writing about plants. Now, the second method or technique I'd like to introduce you to is sensory dialogue. And it's comparable to what we just experienced. And the aim is once again to develop dialogue with plants, but this time through the senses. And once again, sense experience is always a dance between people and plants. It's always a dialogue. So in seeing, we are being seen. In hearing, we are being heard. Touching, we are being touched. Tasting, being tasted, and smelling, being smelled. As we are moving through a forest, moving around or with plants, we are being moved. And as we just saw, as we remember, we are being remembered. So it's important to think of the senses as a dialogue with plants. So for this activity, I'd like you to begin by befriending a plant. Now you could choose a plant that you just had a memory activity with, or you could choose a new plant, a plant that you're drawn to, a living plant this time, not a plant object or plant material, but a living plant you're drawn to in your office, home, kitchen, or backyard, or wherever you find yourself. This could also be a living plant that you remember or that you imagine. It might be a tree that you encountered years ago and in somewhere far away, and you want to imagine that living tree. So however you wish to select the plant, but certainly a living plant in your immediate environment or one that you have been in touch with or encountered previously. Okay, so once you have decided on the plant, greet your plant. What kind of greeting do you receive in return? So greet your plant in whatever way you feel is appropriate. All right, once you've greeted your plant and listened for a greeting in return, I'd like you just to look closely, listen to, smell, touch, if possible, if it's possible to touch the plant or taste. Well, that may be possible if you're working with a culinary herb, for instance, but try to extend all of your senses to the plant as another way of greeting and befriending. Okay. As you're sensing your plant, observe how your plant moves. All plants have forms of movement. Also take note of how you move around your plant, how you might move your hands, or in other cases, how you might walk around your plant. Just observe movement, both yours and the plant's. And finally, take note of your plant's habitat. That could be a pot, a particular pot, or a particular nook of the kitchen that your plant prefers. Does your plant have neighbors? Do you know your plant's preferences? Do you know your plant's name? You may have a name for your plant that's not the scientific or common name of the plant. Just take note of those features. Okay, so that is just a befriending of a plant, an introduction as if you are meeting each other in an elevator or otherwise getting to know one another on an initial basis. And now we explore the deeper part of the friendship. So plants can hear us coming. Plants have the ability to hear. Plants seek water sources by listening for running water. Scientists have demonstrated that. A plant known as rock cress can distinguish between certain sounds, between a caterpillar chewing, between wind vibrations. Plants that need water or have recently had their stems cut produce higher number of sounds per hour. And hopefully you can hear this, but in fact, this is the sound of a tomato plant that hasn't received sufficient water. Hopefully you can hear the clicking. So plants can hear us coming. As you engage with your plant through the sense of hearing, I'd like you to respond to two questions to make sure this dialogue is flowing. The first is, what does your plant sound like? And that's the most common question we tend to ask in terms of the sense of hearing in the plant world. What does the forest sound like? What does your plant sound like? But then I'd like you to inverse that question and also ask yourself, what does your plant hear or say? What sound does your plant make, right? So what does your plant sound like? And what does your plant hear or say? Or what sound does your plant make? So take a few minutes and try to write down some of the phrases or words that come to mind. What does your plant sound like? What does your plant say? Okay, so what does your plant sound like? What does your plant hear, say? Now let's look at another sense, the sense of smell. And of course, plants are valued to a great degree by their fragrances and aroma. Whole perfume industries have been created around the smells of plants. But in fact, plants have their own capacity for smell. And plants are known to detect odor molecules. These are called volatile organic compounds. These are the compounds that give essential oils their scents. And so plants use these volatile organic compounds to communicate. So they transmit these compounds and they receive these compounds. So it's a form of smell in plants. These molecules, these VOCs that we know because of essential oils and other fragrances, when they accumulate in the cells, at a certain threshold, they'll begin impacting plant behavior. Now, that could be a signal to the plant to bolster its response to a predator or to a disease. So these VOCs, through the sense of smell, are communicating from plant to plant and from plant to animal, plant to human, plant to other organisms. Scientists, in fact, say that plants may be able to recognize a much greater variety of odor molecules than animals, which is remarkable if you consider the odor capacity of dogs or bears, right? So plants can recognize a huge range of odor compounds. So plants can smell. So just like we did with hearing, what does your plant smell like? Does it have a smell? If it doesn't, you can visualize or imagine the smell. And what does your plant smell? Let's take a few minutes just to freely write whatever comes to mind. Okay. And finally, of course, there are many senses, but we'll conclude with the sense of kinesthesia. Kinesthesia, the sense of one's orientation in space, the sense of movement through space. Plants are, in fact, highly mobile. Many of us who may garden or work with plants on a regular basis, we know that plants are highly mobile. Of course, they have qualities of tropism, phototropism, growing towards the light, and geotropism, growing towards the pull of gravity. When a plant is turned upside down, it will tend to reorient itself, especially towards the light. You may notice in certain dense forest environments how plants may be curving downward for whatever reason through maybe a storm that came through and crashed through the forest. And then they start reorienting over time. They start growing up towards the light. So plants have that natural capacity for kinesthesia. Plants have been shown to be aware of where their branches are and to know the tendrils nearest to them. They can also recognize the tendrils or roots of kin and distinguish those roots from non-kin, from plants who are not related. Right, so plants have this ability to differentiate movements. The daughter plant makes circles in the air while it searches for a suitable plant to parasitize. So plant movements occur on a different time scale, but they are nonetheless effective and enable the plant to live the best possible life it can within a habitat. So the final question, how do you move around your plant? And how does your plant move around? Okay, fantastic, everyone. And of course, you could use this approach for all the senses, for vision, for taste, for touch, right? So it's a way to transform your approach to engaging with plants so that you recognize the beauty of the plant, so its visual imprint, but then you might consider how the plant perceives you, right? It's this dialogue of the senses. Okay, so that concludes this section on on sensory dialogue and remembering with plants. And I'd like us now to have an opportunity for questions, answers, discussion, any feedback from the exercises, any questions you may have about plant sentience, how to connect with plants, or any impressions or responses at all. We'd be very happy to hear from you. You can ask your comments and pose questions in the chat, or feel free just to raise your hand with Zoom, or simply unmute your mic and ask a question. So yeah, so let's shift over to that. I will stop the share, and I'll also end the recording, so none of your questions and comments will be recorded.